Daniel Dubois opened up about his recent situation by explaining that he had fallen ill in Riyadh at a time when he was preparing to fight. He said that despite his personal wish to continue, he ultimately had to listen to the advice of his doctors, his father, and his team, who all strongly recommended that he should not step into the ring while unwell. He admitted that making the decision to withdraw from the fight left him feeling gutted, but he also accepted it as part of life, acknowledging that sometimes unfortunate things happen and you must move forward. Dubois stressed that he is back now, hungry to return to action, and eager to give the fans real fights. He spoke with determination, saying that at this stage of his career, he is willing to give absolutely everything he has left to achieve his goal of becoming a two-time heavyweight world champion. When asked how his relationship with Daniel was going and whether they speak much, Dubois surprised many by admitting that the image Daniel projects publicly is very different from the reality behind closed doors. He explained that he had been shocked at how different the man was compared to what the boxing public assumed. In Dubois's eyes, he saw him as someone undeserving of the opportunities he was being given, going as far as calling him a disgrace to the sport. He questioned why Daniel had even been granted such a shot when, in his opinion, he had not beaten any fighter of notable standing and had consistently fallen short whenever he faced top-level competition. From there, the conversation turned toward Dubois's looming fight with Moses Itama. Publicly, Dubois has been speaking with confidence, insisting that shock and surprise await those who doubt him. But critics have begun to interpret his words not as confidence, but rather as signs of hesitation, almost like an escape route disguised as bravado. The narrative being pushed forward suggested that while Dubois keeps mentioning surprises, in truth, he seems more focused on looking backward at unfinished business with Joseph Parker rather than facing the rising threat of Moses Itama. Observers noted that Dubois often talked about wanting to silence critics and prove his doubters wrong, but the way he framed his comments sounded more like deflection than hunger. He even told people that if anyone wanted proof about his past excuses, they should ask the border control doctor who had examined him, as if trying to justify decisions rather than embracing the next challenge. Fans began noticing that instead of directly locking in on Itama, Dubois's attention appeared fixed on Parker, making it seem like a diversion rather than true focus on the task ahead. When Dubois was pressed about the accusations of ducking, especially after his loss to Parker, he defensively insisted that all he wanted was to deck somebody. He rattled off a list of possible opponents, trying to show willingness, but the tone only reinforced the perception that he was eager to talk around Moses Itama rather than meet him directly. At this point, Moses himself stepped in with his perspective. Calmly and firmly, he laid out the reality he saw. Itama highlighted the clear gap between Dubois's public bravado and what he had personally observed in training camps. According to Moses, Dubois appeared meek, uncertain, and not nearly as intimidating as the image he tried to portray in interviews. To Itama, Dubois was not the monster fans imagined. Instead, he looked like a fighter who was carrying hesitation, a man carefully avoiding the inevitable clash that boxing fans desperately wanted to see. Moses stressed that he understood styles make fights and believed that Dubois's style was tricky, but he also underlined that their matchup would be an intriguing and defining one. Even Joseph Parker, who has history with Dubois, seemed unconvinced that Dubois would actually face Itama next. Parker's careful choice of words betrayed his own skepticism. He pointed out that in boxing, politics often dictate what happens behind the scenes, and though he admitted a Dubois versus Itama fight would be an exciting matchup, he honestly doubted it was going to happen anytime soon. His tone mirrored the whispers already floating around gyms. Dubois was stalling, circling familiar names like Parker rather than taking on the new, fearless young contender in Moses Itama. Promoter Frank Warren was then asked about Dubois's situation. Warren tried to ease the criticism by comparing Dubois's journey to that of Frank Bruno, who also suffered setbacks before finally winning the world title on his fourth attempt. Warren emphasized that Dubois was still only 27 years old, reminding people that youth and time were still on his side. Yet the underlying message sounded more like damage control than genuine faith in his immediate future. Fans read between the lines and saw excuses, delay tactics, and a softening narrative that essentially pushed Moses aside while Dubois was repackaged as a work in progress. Commentator Johnny Nelson then spoke bluntly about the crucial mental differences that separate true fighters from those who merely talk the talk. He explained that fighters at the top must shut out distractions, isolate themselves, and reach a higher mental state to thrive in the brutal sport of boxing. Nelson's words cut deep into Dubois's current image. highlighting that he had not yet shown that mental switch. In contrast, Moses Itama, though still a teenager, already displayed that level of discipline, focus, and intensity. Instead of living in excuses or clinging to old grudges, Moses lived in pure fight mode. Nelson's analysis starkly exposed the contrast. Dubois, the veteran, looked distracted and hesitant, while Moses, the rising teenager, already carried himself like a seasoned professional. Former world champion Froch added his perspective, discussing the realities of what he called the hurt game. He described boxing as a sport where fighters must approach every bout like they are walking into war. Froch stressed the need for absolute fearlessness and readiness to endure damage, noting that when he was in his prime, he always entered fights with that mindset. He contrasted that with the body language Dubois often showed when Moses' name was mentioned. To Froch, Dubois looked like someone who wanted to survive rather than go to war, more concerned with protecting his image than risking everything for glory. Froch's blunt words served as a gut check, reinforcing the sense that Moses already carried the warrior mentality while Dubois continued to linger in doubt. As the speculation continued, Warren's responses about matchmaking did little to silence critics. When asked directly about Moses Itama, he spoke vaguely, saying Dubois would fight somebody in the top 10. To many, that sounded like matchmaking code for a softer opponent rather than the dangerous teenage prospect everyone wanted to see. Fans were unimpressed, believing that Warren was protecting Dubois from a nightmare matchup. The longer Dubois delayed, the worse the optics became. People saw a hungry young lion in Moses, eager to take on anyone, and a hesitant Dubois, circling safer names to preserve his career. British heavyweight Dave Allen then delivered a viral soundbite by branding Dubois the chairman of the Quit Committee. Allen mocked Dubois's reputation, pointing to the time he quit against Usyk despite appearing physically fine afterwards. He said Dubois had effectively crowned himself as the top quitter in the sport. While Allen's words were harsh, they resonated with UK fight fans who were already beginning to doubt Dubois's toughness. Social media amplified the joke, and soon Dubois was being mocked across platforms. The perception grew stronger that he lacked the mental fortitude required at the highest level. In stark contrast, Moses had never shown such cracks. Instead, he thrived under pressure, demanding harder fights and relishing the toughest challenges. Former champion Shane Mosley attempted to defend Dubois by pointing out that facing Alexander Usyk was an impossible challenge. Mosley said Usyk simply had too much size, experience, and skill for Dubois to handle. He insisted Dubois had been in the right mindset, but the reality was that the Ukrainian was simply too advanced. While Mosley's defense offered some comfort to Dubois's supporters, most fans in the UK saw it as yet another excuse. They felt that every time Dubois stumbled, explanations were provided rather than accountability taken. Meanwhile, Moses, still only 19, was already calling out top names, sparring men far older, and proving himself without the cushion of excuses. The contrast was clear. Dubois had people speaking for him, while Moses confidently spoke for himself. Trainer Dominic Ingle later gave his own analogy, comparing fighters to Vikings preparing for battle. He explained that the Vikings would drink and dull their senses before charging into life or death combat, but true warriors understood that stepping into war was do or die. He warned that only the sharp survive in boxing. This analogy struck a chord with many observers. It suggested that while Dubois might talk tough, when the time came for true battle, he often dulled his edge and looked unprepared. By contrast, Moses represented the true warrior mentality. He wasn't dulling his senses, he wasn't distracting himself with excuses or image management. Instead, he was sharpening his tools, staying ready, and preparing to dismantle whoever stood in his way. As all these opinions swirled together, the picture became clearer. This potential showdown was not simply another heavyweight fight. It was quickly being framed as a test of courage, authenticity, and legacy. Moses Itama had bulldozed through every opponent so far, carrying himself like a veteran despite his teenage years. Dubois, on the other hand, continued circling familiar names, hyping supposed surprises, and focusing on old grudges rather than embracing the most dangerous challenge in front of him. Analysts, fans, and fighters alike began to converge on the same conclusion. If Moses defeats Dubois, he stamps himself as Britain's next dominant heavyweight force, a symbol of hunger and fearlessness for a new generation. If Dubois somehow manages to shock everyone and defeat the young lion, he could save his career and finally silence the endless accusations of ducking and quitting. But to do that, he would need to transform into a warrior that fans have yet to see. As things stand, the momentum and energy are entirely with Moses Itama. He has become the figure people believe in, the teenager who already carries the aura of a future champion. Dubois, by contrast, looks increasingly like a man trapped between image management and real fighting, between old grudges and new dangers. The longer he avoids Moses, the more fans view him as someone who blinked in the face of destiny. For many, this fight represents not just a clash of two heavyweights, but a clash between fearlessness and hesitation, hunger and excuses, the future and the past.